The Mandela effect had always been a peculiar concept, something I had never paid much attention to, just one of those spooky internet mysteries people tossed around for fun. Until college, I had no clue what it even was. I wasn't drawn to conspiracy theories or the supernatural, so it stayed far off my radar. In hindsight, I wish it had stayed that way. It began during my life science class in my sophomore year at Florida State University. It was late in the semester, and Dr. Thompson, my lively professor, had already handed out our final exams ahead of time. She was the kind of professor who understood the pressure of finals season and aimed to give us some breathing room. Most of the class skipped that last session, knowing nothing significant would happen. However, a few of us showed up, some out of courtesy, others due to mandatory attendance requirements. As for me, I simply adored her lectures and didn't want to miss a chance to absorb more of her wisdom. This session was different. Instead of our usual current events discussions about life sciences, topics like GMOs or declining wildlife populations, Dr. Thompson introduced something unusual. She pulled up an article about the Mandela effect. The class was puzzled. What does this have to do with biology? We silently wondered. Her excitement was infectious, though. She looked more thrilled than ever as she addressed the small group that had shown up. "All right, my faithful attendees," she began with a grin. "Today, I have a treat for you. We're diving into something that you may never forget, unless, of course, the universe decides otherwise." She paused for dramatic effect before posing a simple question. "Can anyone tell me when Nelson Mandela died?" The room fell silent, and then a girl cautiously raised her hand. "He passed away a few years ago. 2012, maybe?" Dr. Thompson nodded slowly, scanning our faces until her eyes landed on Jake, a boy sitting near the back. "You look confused, Jake. Why?" "Well," he hesitated, frowning. "I thought he died back in the 90s, in prison, right?" Her face lit up with glee. "Exactly what I was hoping for. Sarah, you're closer to the truth. Mandela died on December 5th, 2013 from a respiratory infection. But Jake, and a few others, remember a completely different version of events." Dr. Thompson introduced two theories behind the Mandela effect. The first, though far-fetched, was time travel. She explained how small changes in the past could ripple through history, drastically altering outcomes. She gave a hypothetical example. A man named Tom might meet his future wife, Lisa, after his dog is hit by a car. However, if someone from the future prevents the accident, Tom and Lisa never cross paths, and the child they would have had, perhaps someone destined to cure cancer, never exists. Of course, Dr. Thompson added, time travel is purely theoretical, if not entirely improbable. The second theory, far more widely accepted, involved alternate universes. Imagine parallel worlds brushing against each other like two cars in a fender bender. Most events remain consistent between universes, but sometimes minor details swap between them, leaving behind subtle, inexplicable discrepancies. In one universe, Nelson Mandela might die in prison in the 1990s, while in another, he lives until 2013. The collision of these universes creates shared false memories, like the idea that Mandela died decades earlier than he actually did. Dr. Thompson provided more examples to illustrate the Mandela effect. "Do you remember the Berenstain Bears?" she asked. "How was their name spelled? Berenstein or Berenstain?" The room murmured in confusion. Most of us swore it was Berenstein, but as it turned out, we were wrong. The correct spelling had always been Berenstain. She went on to describe other anomalies. Curious George, the cartoon monkey, never had a tail, and the Thinker, statue's pose was different from what we remembered. Even King Tut's burial mask, she said, featured not just a snake, but also a bird, though many of us could only recall the snake. These discrepancies may seem trivial, Dr. Thompson concluded, but why do so many of us share these false memories? Is it just the power of suggestion, or is something bigger at play? Dr. Thompson's lecture left me unsettled. I couldn't stop thinking about these strange contradictions. That night, I scoured the internet for more examples, finding countless forums where people shared similar experiences. Though it spooked me, the Mandela effect remained just a passing curiosity, until everything changed. The turning point came a week later, during breakfast with my childhood friend Max. Max and I had grown up together in Tawas City, Michigan, a tiny, quiet town known for its birdwatching, though I never noticed that. To me, Tawas was all gray skies, snowy cornfields, and silence. It felt so isolated that, if it vanished from the map, no one would notice. We met for breakfast early on a Saturday morning during finals week. Max, with his perpetually messy red hair, groaned as we slid into our usual booth at the diner. "I'm starving," he muttered. The two of us had spent the last few days cramming for exams, but what started as a typical day quickly spiraled into something far from normal. Max and I had been close friends for years, navigating the ups and downs of school life together. That morning at the diner, we aimed to leave the stress of finals behind, keeping all mention of classes off the table. But as we reminisced about our early school years at Tawas Christian Academy, the conversation took an unexpected turn. We laughed about how small our class was back then. "There were only 14 of us," Max said with certainty. 15, I corrected him. He frowned, confused. "No way, 14. I can name them all. You, Aaron, Tyler, Zach, Grayson, Elizabeth, Taz, Brian, Amy, the Reynolds twins, Dylan, and Miss Davis. That's it." I shook my head. "You're forgetting Eve." "Who?" Max looked at me like I'd made up the name. "There was no Eve." "Yes, there was," I insisted. "Short, blonde, quiet. She didn't talk to anyone." But Max was adamant. "Sean, I'm serious. There wasn't anyone named Eve in our class." I was growing frustrated. We had 5 girls, not 4. Eve was always sitting at the back of the room, keeping to herself. You just forgot about her. The conversation spiraled into a tense back and forth. I described Eve's shy demeanor, the way she would freeze up when called to read aloud, and even her mom, who always picked her up in a pristine black car, hugging her every day. These memories were vivid in my mind, but Max denied it all. "You're imagining things," he said, shaking his head. "There were 14 of us. That's it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These weren't vague recollections. I knew Eve had been there. Yet Max, who had shared those years with me, remembered nothing about her. It was as though she had been erased from his memory completely. The sensation of being caught in a reality that didn't quite align with my memories was unnerving. It felt like watching a horror movie where the protagonist notices their reflection acting out of sync, terrifying because it's just plausible enough to make you doubt everything. That was exactly how I felt about Eve. I knew she had been there, but Max's disbelief, and now my mother's, was chipping away at my certainty. Still, I couldn't let it go. Eve wasn't some abstract memory. She was real, as vivid in my mind as the faces of my closest friends. To me, this wasn't just a curious quirk of memory. It felt personal, like something was being stolen from me. Desperate for answers, I called my mom that evening. She was surprised to hear from me, as I'd warned her earlier that I'd be too swamped with studying to talk much. When I brought up Eve, her reaction only deepened my unease. "A short, blonde girl in your first grade class?" she asked, her tone puzzled. "No, I don't remember anyone like that. On your 7th birthday, I remember all the kids you invited, but there wasn't an Eve." I pressed on, reminding her that Eve hadn't come to the party because she was shy. My mom sounded unconvinced, but offered to send over some old pictures from that time to see if I could point Eve out. "But," she added, "there were only 14 of you in that class, right?" 15, I corrected her, though I could feel the growing knot in my stomach. "No," she said, almost absently. "I'm pretty sure it was 14. When the photos arrived, I knew they were unlikely to provide the proof I needed. If this was truly the Mandela effect, there was no reason to believe Eve would appear in them, even if she had been there at the time. Like those bizarre images of people posing incorrectly in front of statues whose forms had changed, the evidence of her existence could have been rewritten by the universe itself. Still, I had to try. The first photo was of me, Max, and a few classmates playing in the mud during aftercare. No Eve. The second showed Max and me sitting at a picnic table during an open house. Again, nothing useful. But the third picture caught my attention. It was from the Christmas concert we performed in first grade. All of us, every single classmate, had sung 3 church songs in front of our parents. If there were any picture where Eve should appear, it was this one. The Christmas concert photo was etched into my mind as I stared at it. It was haunting, not because of what was present, but because of what was missing. In the picture, the boys stood in 2 neat rows, 5 in front and 5 on the riser behind them. The girls, however, were arranged asymmetrically. 3 stood in front and only 1 was on the riser. Between two of the girls in the front row, there was a glaring empty space. It felt wrong, as though someone had been plucked from the photo. The asymmetry didn't make sense. Why isolate one girl on the riser when there was clearly space to fit another? I remembered Eve standing there that night, in her white dress, frozen with stage fright. She hadn't sung a word during the performance, too petrified to even lift her voice. Yet in this photo, she simply didn't exist. I saved the picture to my phone, determined to show Max. When I did, his reaction surprised me. He studied the photo with growing unease. "You mentioned Eve before we even saw this picture," he admitted. "That does make it weirder." Still, Max wasn't ready to embrace the idea of the Mandela effect. But his curiosity piqued enough for him to ask his mother if she had a copy of our class photo. When she confirmed she did, we both waited anxiously for her to send it. When the class photo arrived, I gasped. The arrangement of the group immediately brought back a vivid memory. The students were posed in a peculiar way. Miss Davis stood in the center with 7 students on either side. The ones to her left were angled slightly, so only the left sides of their faces were visible, while those on the right mirrored the pose, showing only their right sides. This positioning wasn't just unusual, it made no sense. The photo had ample negative space. There was no reason to squish everyone together like that. The odd arrangement, however, sparked a memory. "Max, it's because of Eve," I blurted, my heart racing. "Don't you remember? She got stung by a bee right before the picture was taken, right under her eye. Her face swelled up and she didn't want it showing in the photo. That's why we posed this way, so she could hide the swollen side of her face." Max scratched his head, unconvinced. "We probably just posed like this to save room." "No way," I argued. "Look at all the extra space on the sides. We didn't need to pose like this for room. It's unnatural. This was for Eve. She stood right there." His face darkened as he looked at the photo again. "Honestly, this is starting to freak me out," he admitted. "Maybe we should just drop it." "I can't," I replied. "She was real. I know she was. Why does no one remember her?" I knew the only way to prove I wasn't crazy was to reconnect with our old classmates. If even one other person remembered Eve, I could finally breathe easier. Thankfully, Erin, our class's social butterfly, was still active on Facebook. She'd often floated the idea of a reunion, and I knew she'd jump at the chance to organize one. When I reached out to her, she was ecstatic. Winter break was approaching, and most of us would be back in Tawa City to visit family. I suggested hosting the reunion at my parents' house, as my mom had offered to cater and prepare everything. Erin agreed to contact everyone and promised to get the whole group together. "All 15 of us," she said confidently. My heart skipped a beat. 15? I repeated. "Yeah," she replied. "All 15 of us and Miss Davis." That sinking feeling returned. Erin had always been the glue that kept the group connected. If even she didn't remember Eve, then something was seriously, terrifyingly wrong. Returning to Tawa City for the reunion brought a flood of mixed emotions. The town hadn't changed. Its snowy fields and eerie silence were just as I remembered. But something about being back made Eve's presence feel more tangible, almost like she was just out of reach. I hoped desperately that someone at the reunion would validate my memories, even if only one person remembered her. By 4 p.m., nearly everyone who could make it had arrived. Miss Davis, unfortunately, couldn't attend due to a family emergency, and Norman was untraceable, lost to time and bad decisions. Still, seeing the others was a bittersweet joy. Each classmate had changed in fascinating ways. Erin was radiant, her vibrant personality now accompanied by a sophisticated maturity. Tyler still looked every bit the stud he'd been in school. Brian Reed, now a Navy man, was bigger and tougher than ever, while Grayson had grown more outgoing despite her small stature and acne-marked face. Dylan surprised us all. Once a nerd, he was now tall, handsome, and confident, sporting a scruffy beard that only enhanced his presence. Amy's rebellious streak was visible in her bright blue hair and piercings, while the Reynolds twins had grown into striking contrasts of one another. George was wiry and brash with messy curls, while Jordan had matured into a taller, more reserved version of himself, speaking with a calmness that set him apart from his brother. Then there was Taz, still as excitable and incomprehensible as ever. His rapid-fire speech left us all laughing, just like it did back in first grade. Max and I remained largely the same, Me quiet and contemplative, him freckly and mischievous, but we were closer than ever after years of running together and keeping in shape. For a brief moment, the nostalgia of seeing everyone distracted me. But soon, my thoughts drifted back to Eve. I waited for someone to mention her, for someone to ask, "Where's Eve?" But it never happened. She was absent, as though she'd never existed. After dinner, we gathered in the living room, reminiscing about the past. I wanted to enjoy myself, but Eve's absence gnawed at me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The question clawed its way to the surface. "Hey guys," I said nervously, my voice trembling. "I need to ask you all something." Max shot me a warning glance, clearly dreading what I was about to say. But I pressed on. "Where's Eve?" The room went silent. My heart pounded as I waited for a response, expecting disbelief or blank stares. But then Tyler Mahoney spoke up. "I was thinking that the whole time," he said. My heart stopped. Relief and horror washed over me simultaneously. Someone else remembered her. I wasn't crazy, but the rest of the room didn't share that sentiment. Erin looked puzzled. "Eve?" she asked. "Eve who?" Tyler tried to clarify. "Quiet, short, blonde. She wore dresses all the time." Max, pale and visibly shaken, muttered under his breath, "Holy shit!" The room fell silent as Tyler spoke. "There was a girl named Eve in our first grade class," he said, repeating it with confidence. His words brought me immense relief. I wasn't crazy, but the reaction from the others wasn't as reassuring. Confusion and doubt filled the room. Amy tilted her head. "Am I missing something?" she asked, puzzled. I explained, my voice shaky with nervous energy. "She's not in any of the pictures, not a single one. There's no trace of her ever existing except for my memories." I turned to Tyler. "But you remember her. That's closure enough for me." "I don't remember an Eve," Dylan interjected firmly. "I can name everyone in our class, but no one by that name." Elizabeth chimed in, her tone equally certain. "There were only 4 girls. I remember that clearly. No Eve." But Tyler stood his ground. "Yes, there was," he said. "I even had a crush on her." His voice softened, and he chuckled at the memory. "I wrote her a note once, some corny, embarrassing thing. I tried to give it to her, but—" I laughed, finishing his thought. "Miss Davis caught you, confiscated the note, and started laughing hysterically. It was the most embarrassing day of your life." Tyler nodded, smiling at the memory. "Exactly. How would I make that up?" The room's mood shifted from confusion to unease. No one else remembered Eve or the incident Tyler described. Max, pale and quiet, muttered, "Holy shit." Tyler's recollection gave me some comfort, but the lack of acknowledgement from the others left me unsettled. I wanted so badly to believe that Eve was real, that she had existed, and that Tyler's memory and mine weren't some bizarre anomaly. But even as he defended his memories, the room's silence was deafening. "None of you remember that?" Tyler asked. Elizabeth shook her head. "No," she said softly, her voice tinged with discomfort. "I don't remember an Eve. I don't remember that day either." Tyler looked around the room. How would Sean and I remember the exact same thing if it didn't happen? No one had an answer. Erin finally broke the silence, summing up what everyone was feeling. "That's just really weird." We moved on from the subject quickly after that. The reunion continued, but my thoughts lingered on Eve. I wanted to sit with Tyler all night and compare memories, to hear every detail he could recall about her. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to talk about her anymore. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the memories of Eve. They came flooding back. Her quiet voice as she read aloud, her nervousness at social events, her tiny figure trudging through the snow in her dress, bundled in mittens and a scarf as her mother's black car waited to pick her up. The memory that haunted me most was the bee sting. I could still see her crying, her face swollen and red as she turned her head to the side for the class photo. That image cut deep, filling me with a profound sadness I couldn't explain. I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of a memory. I was mourning Eve herself. Whatever had happened to her, whatever cosmic force had erased her from our reality, it was too horrifying to fully grasp. The days dragged on in Tawa City, the quiet town now tinged with an unsettling energy. I stayed up late, haunted by questions about Eve and the Mandela effect. My parents wanted me to stay until Christmas, but I couldn't bear it. The town felt suffocating, as though its snow-covered streets were soaked with the mystery of Eve's disappearance. All I wanted was clarity. But the more I thought about her, the more questions arose, and the further the answers seemed to slip from my grasp. The thought of proving Eve's existence consumed me after Tyler's revelation. His memory of the note, the one he had written to Eve, confiscated by Ms. Davis, and eventually returned to me, became my lifeline to sanity. If I still had it, it would be irrefutable evidence that Eve was real. I texted Tyler back immediately. "You're absolutely right. I think I kept it. I'll look for it and send you a picture once I find it." The possibility of finding the note filled me with a mix of hope and dread. If Eve had been erased by the universe, how could the note still exist? But I reasoned that the Mandela effect was selective. It altered the primary evidence, but remnants like Tyler's memory or the note might still survive. Like the photographs of people posing incorrectly in front of statues changed by the effect. My dad told me to check our storage unit, where he had stored much of the junk I hadn't bothered to clean out from my closet growing up. Driving to the storage unit, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The quiet, snow-covered streets of Toas seemed more oppressive than ever. Passing the barren cornfields, the frozen harbor, and the crumbling silos, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading into something unnatural. The storage facility was just as eerie as I remembered from childhood. Its cold, echoing halls had always unsettled me. And now, alone, searching for a ghost of the past, I felt more terrified than ever. I flipped on the dim lights and opened the creaking door to our unit, the noise startling me despite my own actions. I searched for over an hour, digging through dusty boxes filled with forgotten trinkets and silverfish. My hands trembled as I worked my way through the clutter until finally I uncovered a small plastic container buried beneath the chaos. Inside were items from my first grade days, baseball cards, a Berenstain Bears book, spelled with an A, of course, and a folded piece of paper. My breath caught as I recognized the note instantly. I unfolded the aged paper, my hands shaking as if the universe itself were trying to stop me. The first line confirmed everything. "Dear Eve." I read those two words over and over, letting their weight settle on me. Eve was real. She had existed. I wasn't crazy. Tyler wasn't crazy. Somehow, amidst the cosmic collision that erased her from reality, this note had survived. It was a remnant of the girl who had been pulled from existence, a fragment of her memory preserved in the physical world. I leaned against a stack of boxes, clutching the letter as relief, sadness, and horror washed over me. Eve had been here, in this cold, forgotten town. But now, she was gone, lost to some cosmic accident. I couldn't stop wondering where she was. Was she alive somewhere, in a universe where everything was slightly different? Or had she been reduced to nothing, wiped from existence entirely? The thought of her wandering, alone and scared, in some endless void filled me with a deep sorrow. But as much as I longed to know her fate, I knew I never would. When I finally returned to Tallahassee, I felt relieved to leave Tawas City behind. I swore I would never go back to that haunted town, the place where two realities had collided and left only questions in their wake. I texted a photo of the note to Tyler and Max, both of whom were as shaken as I was. Together, we tried to move on, though the mystery of Eve lingered in the back of our minds. And then Miss Davis, our first grade teacher, updated her Facebook. A few days after the reunion, Miss Davis, our first grade teacher, updated her Facebook. She apologized for missing the gathering, explaining that she'd make sure to attend the next one. But it wasn't her message that caught my attention. It was the photo she attached. The image was a drawing from Elizabeth, one of our classmates. Clearly done by a child, it was crude and messy, sketched with colored pencils. Yet its simplicity didn't diminish the shock I felt when I looked at it. The drawing depicted our first grade class, 10 little boys and 5 little girls. Among them, unmistakably, was a short, blonde girl with brown eyes and a dress. It was Eve. The sight of her rendered in that innocent, childish style shook me to my core. She was there, drawn with the same detail as the rest of us, as if she had always been part of the picture. And yet, in every other way, she had been erased from existence. Even now, years later, I can't forget Eve. The image of her in that drawing stays burned in my mind. I've lived through horrific and unexplainable events, acts of terror and senseless violence that defy comprehension, but nothing has haunted me like the memory of Eve. She was the girl the universe forgot, erased by forces I'll never understand. And yet, in the quiet corners of my mind, she lingers. An echo of a life that once was, but now exists only in fragmented memories and the faint traces left behind. Wherever she is, I hope she found peace.